Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of This Is My Story. Over the last few weeks, we've been allowing you to hear the stories of some of the staff members at First Baptist Jackson. Now we're going to begin to allow you to hear some stories from some of our church members. Today we are on location with Kendall Smith. He's a local businessman here in Jackson. One of our Sunday school teachers, also one of our deacons at First Baptist. And so we're really excited to have Kendall with us today. And so Kendall, I appreciate you sharing your story with us, so let's just kind of begin with that. Tell us your story.
Well, actually, I grew up literally 6 blocks from here.
Really?
Believe it or not. And I always tell everybody I never left the neighborhood. And even back 69 years ago, this was not really a great place to live, but I grew up in Griffith Memorial Baptist Church, right around the corner on Silas Brown Street. And my parents and I went to Sunday school, church, training union, RAs, everything, every week. But I've come to believe in everybody's life, there are divine appointments. And in my case, there were 4 divine appointments that, no doubt about it, happened in my life. And when I was growing up, like a lot of people when I was 8 or 9 years old, I just followed the herd down the aisle, right around Easter, was baptized on Easter Sunday back in the 60s, and lived that life for a long time. I was a pretty shy person, if you can believe that. And then when I graduated from Central High School, I went off to the wild and woolly world of Starkville and Oktibbeha County, and it only took about 3 nights before I succumbed to the temptations we had been warned about, and especially in church training, and had succumbed to all those. Right. But interesting, going back to my Griffith experience, I would get under conviction in our dorm room, and I'd come back, and my roommate was always going to do his daily Bible readings, and he'd start crying and saying, "What's God going to do to us?" And I'd say, "Tweety," his name was Robin, I said, "Tweety, when we grow up, we're going to graduate, get good jobs, and be deacons in the church. It's going to be okay." And I literally would go over to my bookcase, and my mother, pull out my Bible, and my mother had written in the back of my Bible, "Kendall Smith joined Griffith Memorial Baptist Church on April the 9th, 1964, or whenever it was, and was baptized on Easter Sunday by Dr. Alan O. Webb, who used to be a pastor at Daniel here." And that was my assurance. And I would close my Bible, get back in bed, and that was really what I based my salvation on. So not unlike a lot of college students, or maybe even people that are listening to this, I didn't realize that I was not saved. So getting back to this idea, and I've read this or heard this, I believe everybody has divine appointments in their life, maybe, and we look back in retrospect and realize, well, that's what happened. And the first divine appointment that I can look to was meeting my wife at a random picnic at Pelahatchie Lake in the spring of 1974. Now, one of my roommates at State had quit school, very bright guy, senior class president, but he had quit school, moved back to Jackson, became a policeman. And I'd graduated from State, was living in Tupelo, working for Stuart Irby. And he called one day, said, "You coming home this weekend?" I said, yeah. And he said, "Well, you want to go to a party?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, man, that's great." And he said, "Now, you got to behave because these are church girls." And so I put on, which was in vogue in the South, I had on plaid pants with big old 3-inch cuffs, a dark blue shirt with a long collar, and 2-tone shoes, and I looked like Superfly. And go to Pelahatchie Lake, and I realized right quick I'm way overdressed. But I saw a young lady there, and I thought, like, man, she is cute. had long hair. You know, I remember Sheila gets mad at me describing what she had. Matter of fact, we cleaned out our attic the other day, and I made her keep the outfit she had on, so I still have it.
Did you keep your outfit?
Oh no, I couldn't even get a leg in mine. But at any rate, looking back, that was divine appointment number one, was meeting my wife Sheila, who most everybody at church knows was a ministry assistant with Tom Washburn for a good many years, and she's never done anything wrong in her life. But meeting, I don't even know why she agreed to go out with me.
Yeah.
But I knew that if I wanted to see her, I had to go to church, because she was at church all the time, and she sang in a quartet or a singing group. So they were having the 20th anniversary of McDowell Road Baptist Church down in South Jackson. So we started dating about 3 weeks after I met her at Pelahatchie and got up the nerve to ask her out. And so we go into, it was the 20th anniversary, we go in the McDowell Road Church on a Sunday night. Place is packed, 700 people. So we walk in and going to sit in the back. The music minister who was leading the revival was not, he was there just for the revival. He looks back in front of 700 people and says, well, my goodness, there's little old Sheila Myers back there all growed it up. And they're all thinking in this church, I wonder who that thug she's with. And anyway, that's meeting Sheila put me in position for what happened 2 nights later. And as I said, they were having a revival, and there was a guy named Harold O'Chester. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he was at the Great Hills Baptist Church in Austin, Texas, really well-known pastor at the time. And we went that night, and we were sitting toward the front because she had sung with her group, and the Harold O'Chester was preaching on being in Egypt but moving to Canaan. Now, I had grown up at the Griffith Memorial Baptist Church all of my 21 years at the time, and I did not know what that meant. But God impressed on me, buddy, I think you're in Egypt, and I think you need to be in Canaan. So as best I could do, they had a prayer rail. We didn't have a prayer rail at the Griffith Memorial Baptist Church. So I went forward, knelt down, and I said, God, I don't know what this guy's talking about, but I think I'm in Egypt. And I know without a doubt I'm not living a life that honors you, so I ask you to come in my life and change me. So I got up and went back to my pew, didn't say anything to Sheila much, and all I knew is that the next morning I had been smoking maybe a pack of cigarettes every 2 days. And I lit up a cigarette, started throwing up in the middle of Northwest Street. I lived out in Fondren at the time on the way to work.
Wow.
My language cleared up. I mean, I hate to admit, my language was not good. Yeah. Overnight, cleared up. Overnight, I started liking all these people that I'd made fun in up at State.
Wow.
So that was divine appointment number 2. Now, as a footnote to that, go ahead.
Well, let me stop you right here. So, would you say that your salvation experience was there at McDowell Road Baptist Church that night?
Oh, absolutely.
And so then you for so many years you kind of lived with a false assurance of salvation just based upon a date that was written down in your Bible and a baptism date.
Yeah.
But then you realized at age 21,
right,
that a relationship with the Lord is much different than just going through a religious exercise.
That's right. Yeah.
And really, God got your attention by sending Sheila in your life. And
absolutely.
I like to look at the Bible. You see it all along through Scripture, where God sends what I like to call intersectors, people who just come to intersect our lives at just the right time with just the right message. And that Sheila was that for you.
There's no doubt about it.
And so, by God's grace, God sent Sheila into your life. And it's oftentimes been said that behind every good man's an even better woman.
She gets embarrassed when I say, she's going to be embarrassed when she hears this. Yeah. But over the years, I have been very blessed and very honored to be in positions of service at our church, and was chairman of the deacons. And that was hard for her because she's not an outgoing person. And I went home that night and said, I need to ask you, how are you going to do the deacon's banquet 2 years from now? And she said, what have you done? But I want to do a footnote
Sure.
to this
Sure.
salvation experience at McDowell Road. I was assured of my salvation. I mean, it was obvious that God came into my life, started teaching Sunday school. 10 years went by, and we just had multiple. I mean, we had a lot of revivals at McDowell Road, a lot of preaching, a lot of good preaching or whatever. And you would always hear this phrase, getting the order right. And on your salvation experience and an outward demonstration of what God had done on believers' baptism. Well, I knew in my heart, you never did that. So 10 years go by. Now, by this time, I've been teaching a class for a decade. I was vice chairman of their deacons, and we were having us, and I was boycotting the choir because I was mad at whoever the music minister was at the time. So I was sitting on the second row of the sanctuary, and I would go down and help the pastor, counselor, overflow of people coming forward because we didn't have a big staff. Right. So I'm sitting there and leaned over and praying, and I feel somebody tugging on my sleeve, and it's Sheila. And she said, I don't know what happened when I was 9 years old. So I did the spiritual husband leadership thing and said, well, let's go home and talk about it. So we went home and talked about, I said, well, I've been struggling with this for a decade. We just need to get this estate driven. So I said, let's just go forward tonight. And I said, it's just going to be sort of embarrassing, but let's do it. So we go to church that night, and as a lot of smaller churches do, they have somebody does a solo, and then the preacher comes up, and he said, he started looking around before he preached and said, isn't it great to know you're a Christian and you're on the way to heaven? So he looks over to his left and said, Joe, when were you saved? And he said, I saved in 1946 down there in Crooked Creek. Yeah. And he said, Sally, when were you saved? And she was going, and I said, he's going to ask us when we were saved. Kendall, tell us when you were saved. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, Sheila and I are coming forward tonight to let the church know what happened in our lives a long time ago, but we've never truly followed the Lord in believers' baptism. He stops the service. He said, oh, well, we're just going to stop the service now, and we're going to do the invitation. Y'all come on down here.
Wow. So you were vice chairman of deacons.
Yeah.
And we're coming down the aisle to make the public profession of faith you had made 10 years ago.
Right.
Wow.
Because I'd never gone forward in a service and said that's what happened.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, so then they stopped the service, and probably 500 people in the evening service come by to speak to you. Yeah. And it was a little troubling because people would come by and say, this one particular lady said, I've been praying for you for a long time. And I thought, like, what does that mean? But that was divine appointment number two. And it was, there's no doubt that God had his hand in that, because a lot of people after that, there were some people that came forward over succeeding Sundays because they've been struggling with the same thing.
Wow. So God used that as a testimony for other people to realize that they had come on a similar path. That's incredible.
Right, yeah. You can't, as Bobby Ray says, you can't make this stuff up.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, so you talk about two divine appointments. You say you've had more than two. So share with us the third one.
All right, the third one, as we sit here in my office in this big building, I came to work for a company called Bearfield and Company in December of 1975. Yeah. Basically, after I had gotten fired from a job that I had no business having before that, at an electrical supply company. I was way underqualified. My dad had worked here for a good many years, and he had said, well, if you want to come over there, I'm going to retire fairly soon, and you can have some of my accounts. And I'm thinking, like, I don't want to sell pencils the rest of my life. Yeah. And I started in the stock room, filling orders, waiting till something better came along. Well, this has been 45 years and I'm still here. And so I had a lot, from the very beginning, I always enjoy my job, out selling. I mean, you got to talk to people and they paid you for doing it. Yeah. But our company, through the late 80s and early 90s, began an uncertain period because the founder of the company was in his early 80s, None of the employees knew what was going to happen to us. We didn't know if he was going to sell the company. We thought he was trying to sell it. And ultimately, he had come to a deal with a publicly traded company from another state. The problem was that our main line of furniture that we represent would not sell their products through a publicly traded company. So he threatened, there was a lot of threatening going on both sides and just terrible uncertainty. Well, one day I got a phone call from our manufacturer and said, we want you and the lady that was our accounting man, we want y'all to buy the company and we'll finance it. So I immediately think, I majored in political science up at State College. Yeah. I did not major in accounting. And I thought, well, this is going to be cool. I could be president of the company and have a company car. That was the only two things I was worried about. And it'll get rid of this uncertainty. I mean, I had no idea what a pro forma meant. I had no idea what a balance sheet was. I had no idea what an income statement was. Right. They told us to go work out a price with the owner, Mr. Bearfield. And we realized, and so he worked out a deal with us, but actually our manufacturer had a financing arm that lent us the money. Well, they were so worried and intent on preserving their distribution that they allowed us to pay many, many times more than what the company was worth. I realized this later. Right. All I was worried about was going out and picking out my Buick LeSabre and adding president to my business cards. That's all I was worried about. On March the 12th, 1996, my world changed. Because, well, I'll show you this in a minute. Okay? But we signed, my wife and I, along with my partner, each individually signed personal guarantees for $2.1 million.
Oh, wow.
And what that means is you are telling the lender, doesn't matter what, you're going to pay them back.
Yeah, right.
Now, and to complicate matters, these were on very aggressive time schedules. Like it was a 30-year amortization, but a 10-year term notes. That meant it was a balloon note in 10 years. Right. Well, I'm thinking, oh, well, everything will be fine. I majored in political science. I withdrew failing from Accounting 101 in Bowen Hall up on the campus of State and in the early 70s, and it only literally took me the first month when I reviewed the P&L. I said, this isn't going to work. I said, this is red when it's supposed to be black. And we struggled through that for nearly a decade. We went through several debt reorganizations. We went through multiple company reorganizations, trying to make things work. We were fortunate that we were able to do some acquisitions that I'll talk about in a little while that helped us, but it was never near enough to even pay any more than the interest. And we had to stay within formulas to be able to borrow more money. And I'll never forget where I was. I had gone, I don't know why I even volunteered to do this. I was a messenger to the Southern Baptist Convention in New Orleans several, 15 years ago. Yeah. Drove down, went to one meeting in the Superdome, went back to my hotel. My partner called and said, they're not going to give us any more money. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, they said we're out of formula and the dealership is in trouble and they're not going to put any more money in it. Oh, wow. And I said, well, what are we going to do? She said, I don't know. What are we going to do, Mr. President?
Oh, my.
And I remember it was one of our favorite hotels that my family had so many good experiences. And I laid on the bed, laid back on the bed, stared at the ceiling. And I said, Lord, I've tried everything I know. I've tried all the cunning, all the cleverness, all the financial maneuvers that I know. I give up. And I said, I yield it to you. I just totally give this to you. I don't know if I have to go bankrupt, we'll have to go bankrupt. But I cannot keep living this way. So anyway, I couldn't go back. I was in no mood to go to the convention. So I packed up and I'm headed back across I-10, going across Lake Pontchartrain. And my partner calls back and said, well, they gave us the money. And I said, well, it doesn't matter. I said, you need to understand I have given this to God seriously. And I said, I can't, because she used to scold me when we would, it was nothing for us to leave here on a Friday afternoon. And we would need at least $250,000 to come in over the mail or electronic transfer over the 2-day weekend to be able to meet payroll and pay our 15th bills.
Oh my God.
And we would rush to the post office on Saturdays, and I just said, I can't live this way anymore. And so ultimately, in October the 12th of 2004, we ultimately, the manufacturer realized that we weren't, and they wanted to get out of the financing business. I think we were the final dealership, like, we don't want any more of this.
Yeah.
And they had identified a buyer, and it was a complicated arrangement, but ultimately, the man who now bought the company from us and owns it now, bought the company. Now, we were in a closing over at Butler Snow Law Firm. And we knew this was happening, but the impact of it did not hit me until this happened. But while we were in a room teeming with attorneys, we had attorneys, the buyer had attorneys, the lender had attorneys, the attorneys had paralegals. So the closing documents were in 3-inch binders, and a FedEx envelope came in. And I'll just let you look at this. This envelope contained those personal guarantees that were part of our original agreement. And what do you see on that?
Canceled.
Canceled.
Yeah.
Written in hand.
Right.
And the impact of that meant I was forgiven of $2.1 million of debt.
Wow.
And nobody does that. So I don't know if you want to jump in here with a question before I finish the story. And I was driving home that night on I-20, going back to my home in Brandon. I mean, I was praising God and thanking Him, and I said, "Oh Lord, I thank you for getting me out of this, and I give you the glory. And if there's anything I need to learn out of this, I'm willing to learn, you know. And just if I need to forgive somebody that owes me $50, I'll do that. And you know, if somebody's talked about me, I'll forgive them. And it's not, God didn't audibly speak in my car, but its Spirit spoke to me and said, you could have worked the rest of your life, never taken a vacation, never bought any more clothes, never bought a car. It's conceivable you could have paid $2 million back, but you had a sin debt on your life that my son wrote canceled in his blood. And there's nothing you could do to pay that back. And I said, Lord, you're right. And then, I mean, again, I'm not hearing voices, but it's in my heart. And I'll never forget, I was at the Cross Gates exit, driving past where First Baptist Brandon is now when all this happened. But God's Spirit said, but I want you to tell this story every chance you get. And I said, no, Lord, that's sort of embarrassing. I mean, I'm a kid that grew up down here in Doodleville, in a rough neighborhood, and the American dream is to buy a company, work hard, build it up, sell it, and move to the beach, or just and he said, and I said, that's sort of embarrassing. And God's Spirit said, it was sort of embarrassing for my son to hang naked on a cross for you. And I said, well, you're right. Wow. And the outcome of this of this part has been, I mean, I've done through my life all the things that a deacon's supposed to do, any Christian's supposed to do, a deacon chairman is supposed to be, in that I've been through faith, I participated in that. We had at McNair, I participated in EE at...
His evangelism training.
Right, yeah. But I was always concerned if I was going to do this right, if I had the Roman road of salvation down pat. Yeah. And I came to the assurance by God and said, that's important. We need to know this, but you just need to tell your story. Wow. And that's what I've been able to do, and it's just amazing how often. I mean, this literally happens every week. Right. That somebody's either sitting where you are, or I'm out with a customer, and in the conversation, well, tell me about your company, and how did you get here, and you just sort of and it flows into that. Yeah. And so I feel like this is the phase of life that I'm in now, and it may be the best phase,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Wow, and it's an incredible story. I do want to pause here. You have another divine appointment to talk about, right? Is that?
Well,
there a fourth one?
this was the fourth divine
Okay.
appointment. Now, this was a footnote to what I've just talked about.
Yes.
During our period of ownership, our first acquisition that we opened a branch was in another. I'm not going to name the city, and I'm not going to name the names to.
Right.
But we were very fortunate that we opened a branch in a fairly large city, and the man that became our division man was a guy I really loved, cared about, great guy. He and I grew up in the industry. And during about halfway through our ownership, I got a phone call from him, and he said, "Can you meet me in Forest?" Well, I always met him in Forest when I wanted to get on him about something.
Yeah.
And I just said, I said, "Why are you quitting?" And he said, "Well, I wanted to tell you to your face." And he and the entire, we had about 10 employees and $3 million worth of business. They left in the dead of night, took all of our business, and make matters worse, went to a competitor.
Oh my goodness.
So, you know, that was the nail in the coffin. Now, I knew we were done having any opportunity to survive. About 4 years later, I'm sitting at this very desk, and my phone rings late one Friday afternoon, and a vendor had called me and said, "I don't know if you heard about this man," said, "but he's dying of cancer." And I'm thinking like, okay, you know, thanks for that. So I just, and God's Spirit, so I said, "You need to go see him." And I'm like, "No, Lord, wait a minute. Do you not remember he messed us out of $3 million? And he basically ruined our chance to be a success." And so I sort of dismissed it. Well, I was driving down Gallatin Street going to Brookhaven, and God's Spirit hit me the same way it did over on I-20 and said, "You need to go see him, and you need to go see him now." Well, he lived, like I said, another city. Right. So I cancel my appointment, start heading to the other city. And I'm thinking, I don't really want to do this. But anyway, went in and come to find he was over here in UMC. And his wife said, "You really need to go see him." So I go, and I take this envelope and these documents, and I go in, and he's shocked to see me. And then we reminisce about good times or whatever. "I just want to talk to you about, I want to be sure you know the Lord."
Yeah.
You know, and he just changed the subject. I thought, okay, what am I going to say? I said, "I want to show you something. Did you have any idea that we were $2 million in debt?" And he said, "No, I didn't know that." And I said, "That's why I was so mean to you a lot." Yeah. And I said, "Let me show you something." I said, "You see that? They canceled this debt. What would it have been like if I'd have told our lender, you know, I like living under bondage. I don't want your forgiveness." Right. He said, "Well, that'd be stupid." And I said, "Well, how much stupider would it be if we didn't accept God's forgiveness through his son Jesus?" And he totally changed. Well, he died a year later, but his wife told me that one of his best friends in high school had talked to him, and he had become a Christian. Wow. But I say all that to say, of all these divine appointments, I mean, God's worked through all of them. I didn't see it happening at the time. Yeah. And I mean, we have a big church, and I'm pretty sure God's working through business people, lay people, people that are working everywhere.
Sure. That's an unbelievable story. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. Our time is kind of running out, but I do, before we dismiss, I do want to ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay. And that is, you know, I love, basically as I hear your story is a story of God's grace. God has been just incredibly good to you and providing people at the right time, providing debt cancellation at the right time, providing an opportunity even for you to pay it forward and showing grace to a friend. But I want to ask you a couple of questions, and we'll kind of dismiss with this. For the person who hears this story tonight, or maybe even later on during the week, who is that person who walked down the aisle of a church at an earlier age, but there's just that restlessness in his or her heart, and particularly who wrestles with the fact, if I walk down the aisle now, how embarrassing will that be? Because maybe I've been in church leadership for years, I've been going to this church for years, but you did it, and you did it as the vice chairman of deacons. So what advice would you give to that person who maybe knows that that's something that they need to do, but they're just scared to do it?
Well, I can say this from experience. I can say this from our fellow church members, some of them, that have done that very thing, and the joy that you have after you do it, and the assurance that you have that you followed God's instruction for your life, outweighs any people in our church are not going to be. You have no reason to be embarrassed. Yeah. They love you, and they're going to support you, and they're going to be encouraged. Because I believe I based my salvation on something my mother wrote. Yeah. Mm. I mean, we joined the Rotary Club. Yeah. Right. We don't join the church. We accept God's grace and forgiveness. That's
a great answer. Yeah. And then a final question, and that is for the person who's listening to this who maybe is in a business and they're just over their head and they don't know what to do. What would be your advice?
I may have mentioned this. I was indicted by my partner sometimes because she would say, "Yes, Mr. Christian, yes, Mr. Deacon, are you praying about it?" And obviously, I believe in my case, and I think it's very simplistic for me to say this on the other side, but you have to get to a point of brokenness, and that's not, and it totally broke me from pride, and I'm a prideful person. People that know me know that, but I think the thing is, you have to get to the point that it's just not lip service. You mean in your heart, God, I can't control this, and we're in uncertain times now. Right. And I think this is going to be a problem for not only our members but other people, both of faith and not, with these uncertain times.
There's no question. Restoration oftentimes is right around the corner of brokenness. Yeah, it gets to that point. That's right.
And I was very fortunate in our church to have supportive deacon brothers that I would go to and talk to. Yeah. And they gave me advice without condemnation, or you are an idiot for having done it. Right. And that we are uniquely, I think, positioned at First Baptist for that.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. We want to thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Kendall, for being willing to share your story. And, his story is a story that so many of us can relate to. And so, I think it's helpful to be able to see that the folks you see, and as you sit in a pew, hopefully we sit in a pew soon, but the folks that you see to your left and your right and in front of you and behind you, just regular folks like all the rest of us. And we all go through difficult times sometimes. And those who are Christians, we all have a story, and I appreciate you being willing to share yours because it is an encouragement to all the rest of us. Thank you again for joining us tonight. I hope that you will encourage other people to tune in as well through the week. You may know people who have a story that's similar to one that Kendall has shared, and this would be great help for them. So please encourage others to watch. Again, thank you so much for joining us for This Is My Story.